After making a massive trade in the previous offseason, probably the biggest in their franchise's history, the Timberwolves were expected to be a pretty dang good team this year. Well, they are currently 13-12 in the West, and they are the 9th seed. And given the amount of good players and draft capital that the Timberwolves gave up to acquire Rudy Gobert, a lot of people have been asking the question, was this trade a mistake? And some people are being meaner about it and suggesting that it's the worst trade of all time. Let's talk about it. Real quick, I am uploading daily in December, so if you could do me a favor and support that by dropping a like on the video to help it do better in the YouTube algorithm, as well as subscribe if you're new here, that'd be much appreciated. So right out of the gate, with Rudy Gobert being the player that was traded for, he's probably the first guy that we should take a look at to see if maybe he's the reason why this team is struggling so much. Looking at Rudy Gobert and his performance individually, his points per game and his efficiency are a little bit down. The first of which I really did not expect at all, and his rebounds and blocks are down as well. The rebounds make sense because he's playing next to Karl Anthony Towns now instead of his forward being like, Royce O'Neal. But the point thing is what surprised me, is because I actually expected his points to go up on the Timberwolves just given the amount of offensive options there were. I figured he would feast in he's kind of already had this role before, but like a Clint Capella type of thing, where Clint got up to like 19 points per game when he was on the Rockets or first year of the Hawks, something like that, just by virtue of there being so many opportunities for the guy in the dunker spot around the rim. Not been the case so far, to say the least. So, Rudy's numbers are down. I guess that means that he's the problem. Well, hold your horses on that a little bit. Well, yes, his numbers are down. Let's take a look at his impact metrics, because Rudy has never been a stats guy, he's an impact guy. Last year, the Wolves were 13th in defense, and then they traded for a generational defensive player, and I think it's a 3-time defensive player of the year at this point. Anyways, now they are 15th in defense. Yeah, that's a problem. So I can understand where these concerns are coming from. Getting a generational defensive player and then becoming a worse defensive team is almost hard to accomplish. I'm almost impressed by it. But a team's entire defensive rating, even though Rudy Gobert is probably the most impactful on an individual team's defensive rating, it's not the best way to determine how valuable a defender is. So let's take a look at some on-off metrics. This is what's really going to tell you the story. With Rudy on the floor, the Timberwolves are 6 points better defensively, holding teams to a 110 offensive rating, which would make the Timberwolves the 5th best defense in the league, of course, if Gobert was just on the floor the whole time. So, when Rudy Gobert is on the floor, the Timberwolves perform like a top 10 defense. When he's off, they're terrible. And what makes this even worse is that you would think, okay, then just play Rudy Gobert even more, but that comes with its consequences too, because there are two sides of the ball, and when you look at the other side of those impact metrics, the Minnesota Timberwolves are 8 points better on offense when Rudy Gobert is off of the floor. So we have a very clear contradiction here. When Rudy Gobert is on the floor, you are getting the elite defense that you asked for, but the offense is significantly harder than when he is not on the floor. Now, I'm not really sure that I should have to explain this, but the reason for this is the difference in spacing. The Minnesota Timberwolves last year were the #1 team in three-point attempts. They had a very spaced floor. There were constantly really good shooters out there. They had all the room to operate that was necessary. This year, their three-point attempts, which last year was 41 a game and #1 in the league, they are now 15th this year, and they take just 33 threes a game, not to mention the fact that their three-point percentage is down. This is because the paint is now packed by a huge 7-footer who stands in the dunker spot. And while there are advantages to having someone like that around the rim, there's more offensive rebound opportunities, and of course there's always a lob threat there, which is very helpful on drives. At the same time, his defender being in the paint is not helpful on drives, and that's really the big issue, because obviously the Utah Jazz were capable of being a great three-point shooting team even with Rudy Gobert on the floor. They were one of the top teams in volume and percentage, and that means that Rudy Gobert existing on your team does not inherently mean that your team's going to struggle with shooting the ball. The problem has more so been that the personnel on this Timberwolves roster really doesn't know how to play with a player like Rudy Gobert. They are used to running in a very spaced out offense that they can pretty much drive at free will, and anytime the defense brings help, they kick it out to a shooter who will be open because of that drive and kick. Right now, players like Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell are driving into the paint, seeing Rudy Gobert's defender. There's not quite an opportunity for a lob to Rudy Gobert, so now they're just stopped dead in their tracks, and the perimeter is still defended well, so there's no three-point shots being generated. The reason that they're shooting worse, even though they're taking 8 less threes per game, is the quality of those three-point looks are significantly worse. They're taking bad shots because they can't get into the paint. They're taking bad threes because that's the only threes they can generate, because of how much easier it is to defend this team when they don't know how to leverage rim gravity, when they don't know how to leverage Rudy Gobert being a lob threat. So I think, if we call back to Mike Conley, for example, he joined the Utah Jazz. Him and Rudy Gobert, they kind of had some rough synergy initially. The pick and roll didn't really work the way that it should, because he was used to playing with Marc Gasol, who was not a rim running lob threat, but a more slow, methodical, and eventually jump shooting big as his career went along. It took a little time for Mike Conley to figure out how to deal with Rudy Gobert being out there. Eventually, they developed a great chemistry, and Rudy was able to feast very often off of Mike Conley passes. Really, he was the only guy on the team that would pass him the ball, and that to me is what you can probably, if you're trying to be positive, hope that the Timberwolves can do. Right now, we've all heard about Anthony Edwards' struggles with playmaking this year specifically. He's not a terrible playmaker by any means. He's prone to being a little bit tunnel vision-y, but ultimately he's usually fine. But this is not a type of coverage that he's used to dealing with. This is not a type of, he's not used to a player being where Rudy Gobert is. And then of course, this is not to mention that Karl-Anthony Towns, while a phenomenal three-point shooting big man, is never going to be just a three-point shooting big man. And it would be limiting and frankly a waste of Karl-Anthony Towns to make him be just a three-point shooting big man. So he's still going to have his post touches. He's still going to be looking for interior shots. And now he has to deal with Rudy Gobert being in the paint while doing so. Really, this team has been split up into two separate teams. The team with Karl-Anthony Towns at center that is really good on offense and really reflective of last year's team, although they don't have the same depth that they used to. And then there's the team with Rudy Gobert at center that is great at defense but can't put the ball in the basket. And when you end up playing both of them together, you really get a mix of the two, where Rudy's offensive issues bring the potential of the offense down and Cat's defensive issues bring down the potential of the defense, and you end up just falling in the pitfalls of mediocrity. The Minnesota Timberwolves right now are a walking contradiction. Shout out Green Day. But while I have highlighted some struggles, and these are definitely problems that need to be solved, and I will tell you what I think those solutions are in just a second here, I do want to make this one point because I do think it is important. The Timberwolves right now have a 52% win percentage, and if we were to just take a look at all the other teams in the league that are somewhere between 55% and 45% in the win column, well, there are 11 other teams in that ballpark, with there being 12 total. Everyone, it seems, is around 500 right now, besides for the top of the top and the bottom of the bottom. So I think, frankly, these concerns are a tad overblown. The fact that the team started off 500, yeah, it's a little disappointing, but honestly, if every other team in the league is being disappointing, I don't understand why the Timberwolves are catching as much flack as they are. Meanwhile, teams like the Miami Heat, for example, are doing significantly worse, and I haven't heard really a peep about them. All I'm trying to say is I'm not that concerned about the Timberwolves based on their record. What should really be more concerning is this walking contradiction issue. And all of that said, if they close the season around 500, they would no doubt be a disappointment. So what is the solution here? Well, the spacing one is not Gobert's fault entirely, so I think it's more of a playmaking issue and just simply adjusting to these players being used in a different system. In fact, I would not be surprised at all if the Timberwolves were kind of this year and then great next year after having that year of development. Ant's struggles as a playmaker are clear. D'Lo has been terrible, and that's been the guy you wanted to rely on as a playmaker. So try and trade for a pretty damn good playmaker for starters. And then with the defense for Cat, that's a much harder issue to fix. I haven't really addressed it directly, but Karl-Anthony Towns not being able to defend the 4 spot has been the Achilles heel of this team's defense. He just simply has to be better. There's really no other thing to do. Like, you can't not play him. You just have to play him, and he has to be better. Part of it's his foot speed, part of it's his instincts. So, again, I would not be surprised if maybe going into next season, Karl-Anthony Towns finally figured this issue out, but right now, it's not looking so pretty. So that's the one thing that I think is really going to be hard to fix. I think the offensive issues with Gobert on the floor are going to be solved. The defense from Cat, that's a whole nother thing. They still end up being a plus defense with Rudy Gobert out there with him, but if they want to be anywhere near elite, they're going to need to figure that out. Ultimately, though, I personally believe that the Timberwolves are probably going to be a decent playoff team for a couple of years and not really be a contender. And you can debate whether or not that's worth giving up what they gave up, but at least for a team that has been terrible for my entire lifetime and really the entire franchise's history other than a few years of Kevin Garnett, and they've barely made the playoffs the times that they did, I think if I was the Timberwolves, I would be pretty satisfied with being a perennial 6 seed, That's probably just where they are as a small market franchise. It's not the most fun outcome, but I understand where they're coming from. So I don't think this is going to be the worst trade ever. I also don't think it's a particularly great one. It's pretty much right strike down the middle, which is exactly where the Timberwolves are right now. Anyway, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.